This is we are very happy to host Denis Melnik from the Higher School of Economics, Moscow. He will talk today about the Russian economy today. I think we will learn a lot from it. And I would say that this is an activity promoted by the Russia-Brazil nucleus of comparative economic studies. It's a kind of institution that we created last year when Denis visited us. It's basically now an interaction between Denis and his higher school of economics and us in CEDEPLAR. Alexandre Cunha is the head of the Brazilian delegation, let's say. And we had also Bernardo, Hugo, Luis Felipe, and I as participants on these nucleus, and we did want to. We have some activities. We had that activity during Denis' visit, and we have a common work paper prepared by Denis, Alexandre, and I have a privilege to be in it. Recently presented in a meeting in Santiago.
Yes.
In the
History of Economic Society.
Yes. So that's we survived there.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Later we talk about that. I think that's the more general introduction. You want to say something, Alexandre?
No, it's just to welcome Denis again to a seminar here. It's a pleasure to hear you, my friend.
Thank you.
Yes, and I think that's okay, 9. And we could do a short presentation from Professor Denis Melnik. Denis Melnik is a professor in the Higher School of Economics of Moscow. He has a PhD in economics. He works in different topics, but mainly in history of economic thought and economic history. Am I right, Denis? Yes. So, and he has been in Brazil at least twice. He has, by the way, he has presented a very interesting seminar in 2018 that led to a paper recently published in the Cambridge Journal of Economics between Denis and our colleague that unfortunately left us, Mauro Boyanovsky. So it's we have a traditional relationship that we would like to strengthen. So 9 and 26, I think we could start. Since this presentation is recorded, the people that come late can see the beginning. So, Denis, once again, thank you very much for your kind acceptance of this invitation, and the screen is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Can you see the slides?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. So I was advised to have a talk like 30 to 40 minutes. If you have some technical problems if you have problems in understanding me, this is my fault. But if you have technical problems, please let me know. Indeed, I had the honor of presenting something like this a year ago, slightly more than a year ago, at UFMG, and I want again to thank Alessandri, to thank Eduardo, Hugo, Bernardo, other colleagues for organizing that visit. And I always love to be in Brazil, in Belo Horizonte, in person or virtually as it is now. And the point is, a year ago, I was presenting more or less the same topic, but from the different angle. Now I would like to concentrate more on economic side of the issues. Actually, a year ago, one of the questions, formal or informal, was in different terms, in different wording, but was like that. What do you think? How long the current conflict would persist? Actually, a year ago, that question was, I was asked this question several times, and here we are, a year from that point. The answer is still open, as I hope you all know. So, my point, my topic, my focus now is on economy. What I would like to stress in this regard, especially considering well, we are habituated to expressing our opinions by putting likes, dislikes, forwarding something on social networks. That's a good part of our modern life, to express our opinions, value judgments, moral considerations, and so on and so forth. These all are legitimate forms of expressing, of living, of participating. The point is, we used to, well, we can forget doing all that there is a kind of objective reality. And economy is a part of objective reality. So imagine a train. The train goes. It may go according to our judgments, assessments, considerations to a wrong direction, but you cannot stop the train. You cannot redirect the train by expressing an opinion. For the direction of the train, it is important to understand the direction of rails, the situation with the machines, and so on and so forth, the objective side of that process. But the opinions of passengers, they do not count. That's what I'm saying when I'm saying about the objective reality of economy. What I want to present to you now in the following 30 to 40 minutes is the description of certain objective economic reality, regardless of what we can say rightfully or wrongly. We can say, we can feel, we can think about it. Now, let us just have a brief look at the country profile. Russia, as you may probably know, is still the world's largest country. It occupies around 12% of land area. Of course, as is the case in Brazil and other large countries, the population is distributed unevenly. There are, especially in Russia, there are vast areas in polar districts which are uninhabited actually and cannot be inhabited due to the climate, the geography, and so on and so forth. So Russia is not the large country in terms of population. Brazil is larger. Brazil is, I think, 220, maybe 240, something like these millions. Well, I'm pleased to say to you that Brazil also overcame Russia in terms of nominal GDP. We have, I think, Italy and Canada in between, but still you are faster. GDP per capita makes Russia, well, mid-income country. Of course, there can be different estimations, GDP in purchasing power and all that, but still, this reflects more or less the situation. So this is the situation. Well, of course, as Eduardo told, I'm in history, so I cannot just speak about today, about the present times, without referring to the past. But it is important. What you see here, this is a picture taken by a photographer, a well-known photographer, who actually was funded by the last Tsar of Russia, the last Emperor of Russia, Nicholas II. He traveled all around Russia around 1910, then Russian Empire, of course, and took many colored pictures. So this is the picture taken around 1910, perhaps, or so. This is a nice picture, but this is also, I already used it in some presentations of mine, but this nice picture for me, especially for me as a Russian, is one of the most tragic pictures I've ever seen. But history is tragic because we usually spoke about past knowing what would happen later. Now, statistically speaking, all these wonderful kids who live in a rapidly industrializing country, in these nice, normal landscapes, statistically speaking, they're bound to perish. They're bound to perish in wars, out of famines. They're bound to perish being orphans, being ill, being killed. This is the tragic history of which you see some points here. Actually, my great-grandfather, great-grandmother, great-grandfather, her husband, he was killed. He died immediately after the Second World War. But she, my great-grandmother, she was born in 1907. I remember her well, so she could have been around. She could have been among these kids. I can tell something here about the family history, but this is different history. What I want to say, the Russia's 20th century was a tragic century. And the history of specifically these generations, the generations taken in this picture, is a reflection to it. And this is not only about my feelings, my family stories, and so on and so forth. This had and have still an impact in the modern production structure. Let me say just this. When you consider the situation, look, if you see at this just lines, this is just lines, years, lines, wars, whatever. What I want to stress, what I want you to grasp from this slide is Soviet industrialization is still here. The foundations of modern industrial structure of Russia, as well as other industrialized areas of the former Soviet Union. This is the glory mixed and built upon misery. But this industrial structure is still here, and this industrial structure is robust enough to survive the second half of the 20th century. And speaking in a nutshell, the industrial structure, due to history of its making, was not just an industrialization. It was the industrialization built around military industrial complex. It was not the first choice, and it is never the first choice when you industrialize a backward country, because you need first to provide people with food, with clothes, with with equipments, I mean, facilities for living, not for the war. But the history goes as it goes. And the history of Soviet industrialization is the history of industrialization built upon military-industrial complex due to the history, due to the sequence of historical events. Now, it means that each and every still industrialized part of the Soviet Union has the capacities to adjust to worldwide conflict relatively soon, and has the capacities to maintain the military preparations, military production, military economy relatively long. And this is not only the matter of stockpiles of weapons, of arms from the Soviet period, which is still great. This is the matter of the structure of economy. The foundations of that economy were built upon lives of these people, of the generations built, of the generations born around around 1910, let's put it this way. 20 years ago, 20 years after that, you see Brazil greets Yuri Gagarin. I don't know if the younger generations still know the history of the space explorations. So Yuri Gagarin, the first man in space, he could have been a kid to one of these people, one of these kids, if they survive until 1930s. He was born around 1930. He was born precisely in this, around this landscape, actually. He was a village kid from a village area, I mean, based on Soviet industrialization, he became who he became. That was not only his bravery, that was the strength of the industrial system. But only, and this again about the history, only for 3 decades, between mid-50s and mid-80s, did Soviet people can experience a certain period of relief, a certain period of using and enjoying the fruits of industrialization. Only in this period, the Soviet industrial machine shifted from wars to peace. And this is again was not that was due to geopolitical context. And that geopolitical context was built not only on the results of the Second World War, it was built also upon the Soviet atomic bomb. However, in 1985, Mikhail Gorbachev came to power, perestroika became, and again, this is just dry facts, but I remember well myself, I was a teenager in mid-90s. And while I was walking, there was some elections, one of the first so-called democratic elections, that after the fall of the Soviet Union. And when I came, when I was wandering around the city where I lived then, an old woman, typical old Russian woman, came to me all of a sudden and started to talk with me. It was like maybe 30 years ago from now. So she did belong more or less to this generation. She said to me, look, young boy, there are elections now. I didn't live a happy life, but I will go to that election so that you, young people, will have the possibility to have it. That was one of the ways how history spoke to me. Now, the point is, the tragic point of the story. Unfortunately, after 30 years of more or less stable life, that generation that outlived all these troubles, all these difficulties, were bound to experience are bound to experience the economic downfall, huge economic downfall, and to bear the cost of huge social and economic transformation. Based on the breakdown of the Soviet planned economy, neoliberal reforms, and the start of transformation of the country. Last year, I spoke more or less in length about all these. And for those of you who are interested, this is the book we edited. The book, we have the honor also of presenting the part from Brazil, from your colleagues from the UFMG. But in that book, I have a co-authored piece of mine and my Russian colleague, where we wrote something about the politics, about ideologies that were born out of this transformation. If you are interested, you can find it. I know that this book is in the library. But what did happen to Russia? Here you have seen the chart, which I have already shown to you a year ago, actually. Here you have the real GDP for Russian part of the former Soviet Union. You can see here what you have already seen in the slide. You can see the decline, not the decline. You see the stagnation started around mid-70s. What you cannot see here, a terrible crash, a terrible economic crisis, which was bound to lead to not only economic, but social and political crisis. Now, the point is, the neoliberal story goes like this. Politically, Soviet Union was broken down due to economic inefficiency. Its economy Soviet economy was bound to be destroyed. Hence, economic collapse preceded to that political one. I don't know, but I cannot see this here. The first sign of economic decline started around 1989. The first year of economic decline was 1990. And that decline was not that huge to provide. If a country would collapse out of GDP fall of 2 or even 3 or 4%, we barely would have a country in this world. So my thesis is the crash of Soviet Union was political, not economic. But the price of this crisis is here. Here you have a conjectural that is purely fantastic. Probability of real GDP growth in Soviet Russia if the Soviet planned centralized system where investment process was not affected by market oscillations. You have the conjecture of the growth of the system fueled since late 90s by oil prices. Or fabled story, nothing. Here instead you have the real GDP growth. And the sad part of this story is that the sad for Russians, of course, the transformation, as we know, was successful. But the sad part of this story is only around 2005, 2006 did the real GDP per capita in Russia reach the level of the 1990s. And moreover, as you see, after that, the series of actually the Great Recession started around 2007, 2008, put this line to stagnation. That's all about past. Let's turn to history. No. I'm not good in infographics, so I just copied this picture. The source is indicated, so it's okay, but you can practice some Russian. But infographics is important in 2 aspects. You can see here the pictures of Russian leaders since 1991, and this is real disposable incomes. This is not real GDP per capita. This is real disposable incomes. I suppose this graph was made around 2021, when the pandemic had already came, but when all subsequent crises still didn't. And you see here well, first of all, you can see here while the memory of Yeltsin, first president, is still cherished in Russia. You can visibly understand how warm are the feelings of people towards him. You can also see the other. These are two first terms of Putin. This is the presidency of for 4 years term of Dmitry Medvedev. But you see here the projection made immediately after the end of the pandemic. And the projection was based on the previous experience of stagnation. Stagnation started around 2014, as you can see. And you see that the projection was not rosy. But it was based on the previous understanding and previous, let's say, narrative about the future of Russia's economy. Again, I will not speak to you about the consequential crisis of 1998. I did it a year ago. But since 2009, Russia, as well as the other countries of the world, experienced what we usually call the Great Recession. And this Great Recession is still with us, one way or another. The world has never recovered from the events started around 2008, 2009. And, well, that's all. But then I remember well the feelings of people around 2020, 2029. The idea was, well, sooner or later the pandemic would finish. In February 2022, another huge external shock came to Russia. In a matter of, well, couple of weeks, Russian economy became the most sanctioned economy ever in the world. And in a matter of next months and years, as you see, it accumulated huge amount of economic sanctions. Actually, the use of sanctions as an economic and geopolitical weapon, we can trace it to the Versailles Conference, to Paris Conference. We can trace it to impact of Woodrow Wilson and other architects of modern global economic order. Soviet Union also was the target to sanctions. I won't go to the nature of sanctions and all that, but the idea was now as then, back to the Paris Conference of 1919, economic sanctions are more useful tool for punishment because you do not need to put army forces into battlefields. You can punish a country, a nation, whatever, region, and induce them to do the right things by producing economic instability, by economic punishment, actually. The idea was like that, and the heavy weight of sanctions indeed made many people in Russia as elsewhere to believe that something very bad in economic terms would inevitably come out of this shock. And let us remember also the expectations about the projections about the future of Russian economy made around 2020, 2021. Now, what came after that, what I can define as GDP miracle. Indeed, in 2022, following the imposition of sanctions, Russia's GDP fell. It didn't fall as deep as in 2020 during the pandemic, as you can see. Neither it didn't felt as big as deep as in 2015, 2018. But it did fell like less than 2%, 1% and something. This is not the miracle, this was expectable. And what was unexpected was the growth, the unprecedented based on the previous trade growth of Russia's economy. But given that economy is an objective reality, as I said to you, we all should know that miracles do not exist. Miracles in terms of objective reality simply do not exist. Therefore, there must be some economic explanation to what we usually call miracle. And actually, in terms of macroeconomic analysis, we all know that there are two basic elements around each so-called miracle: investment and consumption. If you have increase in investment and in consumption, and if after that you do not have the increase in GDP, this is the miracle. So let us take a look at the production dynamics. Which is the numbers. Here there are some components behind the growth of the industrial production in 2023. You see that the traditional export-oriented sectors on which Russia's well-being rested before, mining, which is oil, gas, coal, and metal, and all that, stagnated actually. Agriculture, despite the huge successes of exports, so grain exports predominantly from Russia during over past decade, stagnated. Transportation stagnated. If you exclude pipelines, gas pipelines, oil pipelines, you have the positive growth, but it is still stagnation. These are all export-oriented sectors of economy. Of course, there are many reasons behind that. There is a fall of, because we understand that in these numbers, it is not only the magnitude, the volume of exports, or volume of production in general. This is also prices, value magnitude. So one of the reasons behind that was the fall of oil prices. One of the reasons behind the fall or stagnation of mining was OPEC, the petroleum organization decision to curtail to cut the production of oil, whatever. You have the stagnation in the sectors oriented to exports, but you have the wonderful picture of import substitution in manufacturing. Indeed, since 2000, Russia was hit by several external economic shocks which induced import substitution. That import substitution back then, was mainly in consumption goods. Here you clearly see the import substitution at the heart of industrial, old-fashioned, old good industrial system, metallurgy, around 10% growth, machine building, incredible 21%, computer, electronics, optics, you see the numbers. These numbers corresponded to the overall increase, to the overall growth of manufacturing production, equal to 7.5%, which corresponded to overall growth of industrial production. The important factor behind those numbers of GDP growth was tremendous increase in industrial production, induced by imposed import substitution. Another component, consumption. Actually, if you remember the projection of real disposable incomes made in around 2021, you see the stagnation there. Here you have the growth. Indeed, this year, not this year, but calculated real income growth in 2023 amounted to 5.8%. The projection for this year is 5% maybe. And these are not just inflation, these are not the factors as inflation, these are real tremendous increase in incomes. Why? Because before the economic model of Russia resembled very much to the model of so-called dual economy, envisaged, described by great Latin American structuralists, following Prebisch, you know better than me, the Latin American structuralism, I believe. So there are regions in Russia which experience a huge increase in consumption level. And these are big cities like Moscow, St. Petersburg. These are export-oriented sectors of the cities, the regions of export-oriented production, like oil extracting regions and so on and so forth. So these were the centers of services, financial activities, extraction of resources, processing of resources, so on and so forth. There were huge regions of inward-oriented development, again the term from Latin American structuralism, that never experienced a corresponding increase in incomes since 1990s. For many reasons, for several reasons, let me put it this way. People there have a considerable increase in incomes. And you see it here. So the so-called miracle, GDP miracle, which you have seen several slides ago, was built upon increases in investment and increase in consumption. Of course, everything has a price. And you can see one of the main components of this increase. This component was state budget, was budget revenues and budget expenditures, which is more important. I'm not sure if you can catch the colors. Maybe the colors are unhappy, but let me therefore the first to explain in a few words what you can probably see here. The upper two lines in well, let's call it brown. You see the expenditures of federal budget. In orange line, you see the revenues of expenditure of federal budget. By the way, this graph started from 2006. You see the textbook illustration to classical Keynesian anti-cyclical fiscal policy. In terms of crisis, you have in Russian budget, you see the deficit, then you have the profit times. The most important thing are here. First, the pandemic. The pandemic induced a huge increase in relative terms in expenditures. The next crisis produced equally huge relevant increase in expenditures. Of course, budget deficit is a bad thing. But behind it, you have two lower lines. Red line is the revenues produced by oil and gas extraction and exportation. Below, let's put it dark brown line. You have non-oil and gas revenues. And what you can see here, specifically since 2022, first, the decline in dependence on oil and gas revenues, actually. and increase in revenues due to the development, due to the growth of non-oil, non-mining, non-gas, and so on extraction industries. So the problem of, until now, during these 2 years at least, you see the healthy picture, the healthy for each resource-rich country, I mean, because all resource-rich country can, since over past decades, try to solve the problem of dependency of their budgets on oil and gas or whatever they export, mainly oil and gas. Here you have the situation when induced import substitution induced in turn the growth in industrial production and induced the growth of revenues in budget, which outweighed, you can see here it almost arithmetically outweighed the fall of budget revenues from oil and gas industries. But everything, as I said, has a price. And the price, of course, is inflation. When you have budget deficit, when you have the huge increase in investment, consumption, and government spendings, you may reasonably expect inflation. Again, a few explanations. This horizontal line, this is inflation target set by the Central Bank of the Russian Federation since 2016, which is 4%. You see that before the pandemic, by means of strict monetary policy, Russian Central Bank and monetary authorities in general managed to reach this limit. Of course, with the pandemic around 2021, so 22, there was a jump in inflation. And of course, there was a jump in inflation since 2022, which is around 7, 10, 8%, 7 to 8% as for now. But still, I understand that you perhaps know that 7 to 8% inflation, being high inflation actually, is not that high as you might have expected, given the situation. And you can also see the main means of Russian Central Bank to control inflation. This is a high, relatively high interest rate. Let us turn now from domestic economy to international economy. Balance of trade. Balance of trade was also behind the GDP miracle in 2022 and 23. Specifically in 22, you have tremendous increase in, as you see, in exportation. Partially it was based on increase in oil prices and gas prices. Partially it was based on increase in volumes. Now, since 2020, of course, the data for this year, these are data for first and second quarter, but still, trade deficit persists. It is much lower than it used to be in 2021 and 22. On the other hand, the situation just returned to the normality before the pandemic, as you can see here. What is interesting and what is important is the dynamics. Here are some data from the Federal Customs Service of Russian Federation for the year, for the past year, for the year 23. You see here the first line, okay, decrease in export, increase in importation. But more importantly, you see the huge reorientation of Russia's international economic relations. You see the fall of exports from Europe, 68%. The volume of trade is still significant, almost 85 billion of US dollars, but still 68% down. This is downfall, waterfall, snowfall, whatever. This is a disaster. It would have been a disaster unless for example, for these numbers, Asia. First of all, China, India. While the increase is moderate, just less than 6%, the volume of trade is tremendous, $300 billion. Moreover, huge increase in exportation from Africa, which I think it was only in past 2 or 3 years that trade of Russia and trade between Russia and Africa became visible. Before it was it was negligible actually. Now you see here the sizable numbers. Importation. You see the numbers, but you see the numbers for yourself. I wouldn't comment on it, but what can we draw from these numbers? First, despite all sanctions, Russia's economy is not isolated. It reoriented, it refocused, it made a twist and turned from west to east and to south, to global south in general terms. But another point, less discernible perhaps, is to maintain this situation, to sustain it. Deep transformation of economic relations, of international economic relations, and most importantly, financial relations is required. Why? If you compare export and import, regardless, sanctions, whatever, political relations, whatever, this is quite a healthy exchange. Well, you have the deficit, but it's not that huge, neither for Europe nor for Russia to sustain, to maintain, and to continue on this track. That was always the case. Relations between Russia and the West, let's put it this way, was mutual in the sense that the amounts of exports and imports, they were more or less comparable. To the trade benefit of Russia, usually. But in Asia, you have, and in Africa, you have the huge trade deficits. Now, let me just cite one case, the case of India. Over the last 2 years, the difference between exports and imports to Russia almost tenfold, meaning that over the past 2 to 3 years, economic trade of Russia and India accumulated huge trade deficits to the benefit of Russia, meaning that Russia export much more to India than import from India. Well, in terms of simple mercantilism, this is a good thing. In terms of modern economic relations, this is a bad thing. This is the bad thing also because there are no assets, let's say, to cover, financial assets to cover. We cannot use dollars, we cannot use, for many reasons, not only sanctions. Indians prefer to use rupees. The point is, when you accumulate the huge amount of profits in rupees, in Indian rupees, you still should remember that this is basically non-convertible money. So you have a huge amount, you have tens and tens of billions in terms of dollars or euros of rupees, and that is why, for example, his first visit after the re-election, Prime Minister Modi of India, he came to Russia. This is the huge economic problem, which makes me to conclude this part. In order to maintain this reorientation of foreign trade, Russia, not only Russia, of course, but its counterparts, needs to rebuild somehow their financial system. There is the strong impetus, so to say, to avoid dollars, euros, to avoid Western-oriented financial infrastructure, not only for the sanctions, but for other reasons as well. But still, there are no viable ways to do that. Let me just put it like this. I won't comment on this slide. Again, just after 2022, 2023, the data just returned to the normality, let's say, of 2016, 2017, that is to the situation before the pandemic. Nothing tragic or dramatic you can catch from these trends. Again, the data for 2024 are just preliminary, but still the trends are there. The more important, in my view, is this graph, this external debt of Russia. Since the consequential crisis of 1998, the governments of Russia tried to avoid the grip of international debt. And indeed, you can see that the government debt proper is not that high. But the real weak point of Russia's economic system before 2022 was the dependence of international finance. And you see here these green lines. These are actually private debts, not the debts of private citizens, of course, but the debts of companies, of banks, and just in a comics-like illustration. What was Russia's financial system since early 2000s up to 22? It functioned like that. Huge Russian bank, huge in terms of Russian financial market, took money from the West, paying like 2, 3, maybe 4%, put it on its books, and then made loans on 10, 15, 20% in Russia. The margin was there. In fact, as you can see, the debts of the so-called other sectors accounted for like 2/3 of external debt of Russia. And when the crisis came, as it was in 2014, for example, or 2009, there was a choice for the government what to do, either to let the private sector, banks predominantly, to fail, or to cover these debts one way or another, in order to maintain the structure of the economy as it was. What happened? If you are an international bank, if you are a big banker in Brazil and Russia and elsewhere, you are the most ardent follower of global liberalized economic order. If you have the possibility to take money at 4% somewhere in the West and give it to Brazilians, Russians, I don't know, Indians, Chinese for 14%, just doing a certain transformation of money from one pocket to another one, no one ever would persuade you to abandon the ideology of global liberal economic order. No one. The miracle which you see here was not the choice of financial system of Russia, but this was one of the most visible effect of international sanctions. What sanctions did, what political pressure did, they persuaded Russian bankers, Russian big companies, big business, to abruptly cut ties with global international financial market. Let me put it just this way. Now, coming to the end of my presentation, these are some results of the shocks. You can see it here. Let me put it briefly. So far, on economic terms, as you probably can catch it from my presentation, Russia's economy was relatively, I would even say quite strong and healthy. There was not only kind of growth, there was a kind of restructuring of economy based on deep import substitution. The ability and possibility to maintain this trend, however, depends not on economy, it depends on politics. It depends on the possibility to maintain the internal balance of interest, ideologies, powers. That's what I was saying a year ago there in Belo Horizonte, in wonderful University of Minas Gerais. But it also depends on the possibility to and ability to build new geopolitical, let me use this word, structure. And of course, BRICS, relations with Africa, with Deep South goes into this direction. And let me finish. Here you have the pictures which were made by me, which I made like a couple of weeks ago, traveling around Russia. You can compare them with the first pictures, but that's not important. The point is, despite everything, Russia economy still works, but the point is economy always works. Another point, the work and outcomes of this work depends on politics. Politics always matter. So if you ask me, what will be the future? I can just show you these pictures. But the answer will depend on politics, on the ability to maintain and build the proper political infrastructure on domestic and international levels. That's all for Russia's economy today. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Denis Melnik, for your excellent and enlightening presentation, as expected. I think we understand much more what's happening in Russian economy today, now. So it's time for questions from the audience. Okay, are you ready to get the questions, Professor Denis? Okay. As I know that everybody's thinking about what questions you will make, I have already prepared some, and I begin. Okay. Denis, I would like thank you very much, and of course the people that attended your presentation last year here has the advantage of two presentations combined. What I would like to listen to you more is a very specific point on let's say the unintentional results of, let's say, the sanctions that you pointed, the import substitution process that is ongoing now in Russia. I think that's very interesting, very, very important for us to understand. So I would like to ask you three things related to this point that you made in your presentation. First, a more general question. As far as I know, the transition in the 90s, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, it was related to a kind of deindustrialization in Russia. So it's the question would be if you think that you are now seeing a reindustrialization of Russia. I'm asking this because now in Brazil we have a industrial policy that one of the intentions is to manage a kind of reindustrialization, a new industrialization, and so on. So how far do you think this reindustrialization is compensating the previous deindustrialization? That's the one thing. Second, look to the sectors. Your slide that you show the manufacturing growth, and then you broke by you break the sectors. And the last one is computers, optics, and that was the amazing growth of 32%. So I would like to listen you more about if this means that there is an important substitution process, a reindustrialization process that is also enabling the Russian economy to grow in direction of high-tech sectors, and so let's say is a question about the quality of the import substitution process now.
So thank you. I would actually, these are two related questions. I would say like this. I told you that the remnants, the elements of Soviet industrialization base are still here. And actually, I was surprised how strong they were, despite the ongoing the process of deindustrialization initiated in the 1990s. In my view, the industrial growth which we have seen is in a large part the result of, let's say, revitalizing of those industrial capacities. On the other hand, there are new sectors. You mentioned computers, electronics, optics. These are definitely mostly, these sectors are definitely not Soviet mostly. And here we come to the difficult part of each and every industrialization, regardless of context and the situation. You can you can launch the assembly factory relatively fast, relatively easy, assuming you have an access to the equipment. But in a modern world, you cannot have the, look, we all know what happens. We all know why the situation in Taiwan is important, because it happens so that Taiwan produces like 60, maybe 70% of chips, of computer chips in the world. If you exclude this island from the world economy, it is bound to crash. What I'm saying is Soviet industrialization was so hard for the people and so effective and tremendous maybe, but effective, tremendously effective, let's put it this way. Because it was built, it was focused on the fullest possible degree of import substitution. You can You could do that in 1930s, because in order to build a car, in order to build a steel factory, well, you do not need international cooperation mostly. You know well what I'm saying. What did change after that? In Brazil, you have the good car industry. I mean, the production of cars. But this is not the production of cars. As in Russia, this is the assembly of cars from foreign components, from foreign parts. Now, the most vulnerable, as it happened in Russia, the most vulnerable industries, the most vulnerable sectors of economy were not the export-oriented sectors, because oil, gas, grain, whatever, more or less easily found the new market outlets in the world. But the most vulnerable industry, for example, was car production, not because the impossibility to export the cars, they were not exported, but because impossibility to import the details. And it happens so that even in a modern car, the wheelchair is not just a piece of wood or a piece of plastic material. This is a complicated electronic device, because in wheelchairs you have all these cushions,
shapes.
You cannot, the point is, you cannot just take a certain amount of plastic material and put, make it a wheel in a modern car. That's the point. That's the point. So, speaking of last 2 years or so, the import substitution was was based on revitalization of industrial base of the Soviet Union, which still persists, and certain successes in, let's say, importation of parts, of components used in the domestic production, as well as certain successes in import substitution in industrial production proper. But in a modern world, this is the point. No one, even the most developed country of the world, no one can expect to have the full cycle of industrial capacity, even the United States, even Japan, not to mention countries like Russia and Brazil. That is why we are hearing so much about international cooperation. Without international cooperation, each country, even as big as Russia, Brazil. Look, what happened? I'm really pleased to be in Brazil. Since my teenage years, I used to listen to neoliberal follies like small is beautiful, resource scarce, you know, if you have rich deposits of oil, gas, forests, whatever, you are bound to have bad institutional structure. I mean, I can tell you, and I'm especially pleased that I'm saying it to Brazilian, if you experience a huge external shock, whatever the origin of this shock is, it is better to live in a big, resource-rich countries. Congratulations, Brazilians. You are in a good company. I'm saying good company, but you can cut this off because I'm saying this from the most sanctioned country of the world. But given all that, the selling in the industrialization process without international cooperation, and my greetings specifically go now to our colleague and friend from China. Without successes in international cooperation, built not only on economics, but also on politics, each and every country in this world, however big and rich and resources and potential this country are, they are bound to fail selling. You cannot industrialize too deep, let me put it this way, in the modern world, based on modern technologies, without one way or another, without international cooperation. That would be my answer.
Thank you.
I have a question too, but
Please, you are the chairman of
it's a short one.
Nucleus, Brazil, Russia, Brazil, Nucleus. Yeah.
Please stop. So Denis, I have a short question, just to understand better the regional aspect of the development in Russia, because you start with that beautiful picture of Prokudin-Gorsky, is that?
Yes.
Prokudin-Gorsky.
Photographers of the World United.
Yeah, well, Brazil also had an interesting change in the population, the rural and urban population related to the industrialization in the middle of the 20th century. And I know that trends also happened in Russia, but I would like to understand better how the situation is now with this new increase in the industrialization, and also because you in the data that you showed us there is this decline in the agriculture production. So is happening something in terms of the regional aspect of this development that you could tell us?
These are two questions actually, because as for agricultural production, I would say that fall was a fall comparing to the previous increase in agricultural production oriented towards export. Because in Russia, you have, even in grains, you clearly have the distinction of regions producing grains for domestic consumption and grains oriented to exports. But this is not, look, regarding the second part, this is not about rural, look, Russia, Soviet Union, whatever, became industrial nation in 1960s. It was in 1960s when the proportion of rural to urban population was around 50-50, and since 70s onwards. So now rural population is like 12%. Well, Russia is big, and you still can find the predominantly rural areas, but this is not the normal situation. Let's put it this way: normal in terms of economic structure. The point was that the industrialization, of which Eduardo also told, hit previously industrialized areas. Let me put this in Russia, like everywhere in the world, hit by deindustrialization. You can clearly see rust belts. You can clearly see the formerly industrialized areas that between 1991 and 1999 turned to be rust, dust, misery, whatever. Look, I remember Gagarin, because several time ago we traveled. It was like his birthplace is like 3 hours by car from Moscow, 3.5 maybe. It's still predominantly rural landscape with small towns and all that. But when you travel across, especially in a car, you feel like, wow, you are in the middle of nowhere. And you feel, I mean, I suppose in Brazil you can also have the same feeling. And what strikes me with example of Gagarin is that in 1930s, it was also a war-torn area. In 1930s, 1940s, how a boy, a teenager from this middle of nowhere would become Gagarin. This is the miracle of industrialization. But in modern Russia, you see these areas, but you do not see, of course, industrialization comparable to the middle of 20th century. But you see the increase in incomes. So people there, they start to earn much more. They start to connect to consumption society. That's the consumer society, to consumer more, consumerism, let's put it this way, which was unavoidable to them. And this is the good part in current situation, but this is also the bad part in the future, because if this demand would not be matched by increased industrial production capacities in general, we all understand what would happen. But also I was just again, sorry me for personal memories. Just days ago, we returned from Kaliningrad region, which is an exclave, Russian exclave, the most western part of Russia, surrounded, by the way, by NATO and EU countries. So you cannot easily reach it. You should fly over neutral parts of the sea to fly from Russia to Russia, whatever. And I was speaking with locals, with people, and they were saying me, this is a former Germany, for you to understand. You still have these paved roads of 1930, and you expect certain Horich of 1930 to appear there. And I mean, you believe that you are in some movie of that period. But what's true, so what impressed, I was really impressed that around there were fields, there were cows, it was heavily agriculturalized area. And when I was start talking to the locals, they were saying, look, that before the pandemic, it was nothing. Before the pandemic, we just travel each week, basically. Like in supermarket, we traveled to supermarket indeed, but those supermarkets were in Poland. So what they did, that they just had this permanent visa or whatever, and they just would go to Poland, to Germany maybe, to buy products and all that. Pandemic and the subsequent shocks induced this region of Russia to develop agricultural production and to develop touristic industry. They now start to build, roads. It actually started with football championship of 2018, but they started to build decent cottages touristic industry flourished this is not industrialization, of course, but this is an example of the successes which can happen, and indeed happen in the regions where you do not need excessive amount of investments, but you have the capacities and you have the demand. As for metallurgy, as for machine building and heavy industry, of course, you need huge amount of investments and huge amount of international cooperation. So I wouldn't define it reindustrialization proper. This is just making the machine that used to work again with addition several elements and so on and so forth. But in order to have industrialization, you need to have industrial policy proper. And that's, you from Brazil can tell me better about the successes and also failures in such industrialization attempts.
Thank you, Denis. Now we have a question from the student, Luca.
You can collect some questions.
Yeah. Okay.
A round of questions.
David, Bruno. Okay, 3 questions, and then you answer all together. Okay, then?
I prefer to have...
Okay.
Okay, so Luca.
Thank you for your presentation. It was very enlightening. I have a question on this topic of reindustrialization, more specifically with regards to the current climate crisis. If you think that this, if you think that this modern process of reindustrialization is taking into account the climate crisis, the international efforts to avoid new emissions of carbon, mitigation, adaptation, if you think it's being in any way taken into account this issue, or whether if you also think it should be taken into account. Yeah, that's about it.
Look, if I may recap your question. So you're asking me, do I think that ecology is important for economic growth? And we should take ecological issues in considerations, right?
Yeah, more if you think these considerations are being taken with regards to this reindustrialization that's taking place.
No, you cannot do this. Look, you simply cannot do this. That's the point. Ask people in China, and I mean, I personally do care about green forest, blue sky, clear water, and all that. But if 1 million, if 1 million people say to you, "I want to use toilet paper," what can you do? If 1 million people, or 1 billion people for that matter, says we want to consume more, for that we need more energy, what can you do? If you live in let's say, New York or Silicon Valley, it's okay. You can use wooden straws or whatever. But if the point is, look, for example, the case with solar industry, we all know now that first, it is fueled by massive investments, non-market investments, and it is fueled actually by coal, by nuclear energy, by the traditional sources of energy which you need to use in order to produce solar energy and so on and so forth. So I would say that, look, let me say, if you want to have industrialization, you cannot have ecology. But this depends on the way how you do this industrialization. And for example, Soviet experience of centralized heating in the cities allows to consume much more energy per unit of consumption. But for this, you need to have the centralized look. In all Moscow, you can switch on and switch off the heating in the houses, which is important for Russia, for Moscow, when you have -20 for many consecutive weeks. You can do it by literally pushing one button. That's the way to save a lot in terms of energy, in terms of ecological pressure. But for this, you need to you cannot have, let's say, market. You cannot have the market-oriented system of communal facilities. Of public goods. Let me put it. Sorry for being maybe too leftist. I don't know, but but the modern left would say that you need to be in favor of green energy and so on and so forth. That would be my answer.
Okay, thank you. Let's move. The next question will be made by Professor David Gomes. I would say that he's from the law school, Denis, so we are having very important visitors here. Please, Professor Davi Gomes.
Thank you very much, Professor Denis. I'd like to hear a bit more about the issue of financial order. How do you see the prospect of another global financial order? I mean, how do you see the possibility, mainly the political possibility, of an autonomous international financial order among the countries of the BRICS?
Unfortunately, I do not see it in bright terms for one simple reason. We have now the huge conflict in the world because we can say everything we want about West or East or whatever, but we still live in a Western world, meaning that we all, those of us who do not live in the West, they live on the periphery of the global financial system, dominated by the Western financial system. We can say a lot of things in terms of modern leftism about the nature of this domination, about patriarchy or whatever. But the point is, the modern global economic order would persist as long as the modern financial system will persist. And the point is, unless you have something to substitute for the dollar, you cannot have another global international system. I refer to the problem not to the problem, I refer to the situation, the huge proficiency in trade between Russia and India. Normally, you can easily solve it by calculating and exchanging the payments or the right to payments, the securities nominated in dollars or other currencies connected to dollars, be it euro, be it Swiss franc, be it Japanese yen. Let us ask our Chinese friend. Is People's Bank of China ready to be, or even want to be the last resort international bank of settlements? Judging on his smile, I would say that it is not. So when we are counting the debt of US Treasury, let us remember also that this is the debt on which all we rest upon, because without this debt, the Wall Street would crash tremendously. That's okay. But what would happen next? So the point is that so far we have the system of bilateral agreements, which you need to solve on case-to-case basis, let's put it this way. Politically, you need to find when you have the system of bilateral agreements, you need to find political solution to market transactions. That's very costly. And in the meantime, there is the demand for such a system. There is the demand to avoid Western global financial order for many reasons. But there is no, let's say, supply. And this is the huge problem, I think, of this world. If we want to overcome this problem and ensuing conflicts as well, we need to have another financial system, but we cannot simply just build it by, which is unfortunately, you can see the examples of many development banks, BRICS Bank, whatever, regional banks, they are all maybe important, but they cannot be the bank for international settlements. That's the point. So unfortunately, your question was very important. My answer is perhaps useless, but but the point is, when you have a situation like this, you have the many possibilities for conflicts. Therefore, we live in a very interesting world. I'm really happy to say to younger people here. your future will be interesting.
What's the future?
The future of young people there and over there will be interesting.
Yes, I do agree. Interesting. Thank for this advice for the younger generation.
This is not an advice, this is a prediction.
Diagnostics, né? Okay, so next question. Bruno is a PhD student that is coming to China in the next semester. So he will spend 6 months there in his sandwich program. Bruno.
Thank you, Professor. I would like to ask if there is any political tension between sectors in Russia. So, for example, if we see a decline in oil and gas and a rise in high-tech sectors, like, is there a kind of emerging bourgeoisie, high-tech bourgeoisie, with its own political demands? For example, Yandex company, or nothing like this? I don't know.
Look, luckily or not, well, first of all, there is not a decline in oil production sector. This is a stagnation in exportation and production, therefore. But the point is, oil and gas sector in Russia, luckily or not, I repeat, is not the private-owned sector, even if formally there can be private-owned enterprise. They are heavily controlled by the government, by the state. The conflicts, well, if you remember, the key rate of central bank now in Russia is, I think it was on the slides, it was like 16%, which is quite high, as you may imagine. 16 or 17, I don't remember quite well, but it is quite high. So the conflict is between those who want to maintain the stable financial system, meaning the central bank and the financial system itself, and those in the industry who want cheaper credits. So there are people who want cheap money and therefore soft monetary policy, a softer this monetary policy, and those who want to have it hard, let's put it this way. But I wouldn't say that, given the political context and all other elements, there is open conflict between different sectors of industry. Also because all sectors of industry and all sectors of finance were disentangled from the international economic relations in many ways due to the rate of sanctions or the possibility of sanctions.
Okay. I think we have more 5 minutes. One last question.
I can be with you as long as you want, actually, but this is not the questions.
Thank you very much, Denis, because here there is this is part of a class, and the class formally goes until 11 o'clock. So
I will have my cachaça afterwards.
That's the problem of the virtual meetings. But you have the right. We will give you a voucher for a cachaça that when you come back to Brazil, you may use the voucher.
I have another suggestion. We can send by mail just to test the customs, the mail of the two countries.
The voucher or the cachaça in itself.
We can test. Let's see what happens.
But okay. Final question. Okay. So my colleague, Professor Ricardo Machado Luiz, who is our ambassador to China.
No, no.
Yeah, well,
You're definitely wrong again.
Professor, let me ask you.
you love to invent titles for people.
He loves title. It's a kind of king, you know.
Monarchist.
This kind of thing. Well, I'd like to ask you about this kind of, let's say, revival of industrialization in Russia. And what I'd like to understand a little bit the role of China and India in this revival of industrialization. Since we are discussing new international relations, they are moving from from Europe to Asia or South Asia or something like that. What's the links? I mean, links between companies in Russia and links between companies in India and China. Are they like exporting or trading technology? They are exporting what from Russia to India, and what Russia exporting also to China, and the other way around. What China exporting to Russia and what India exporting to Russia. I'm asking that because, as far as I can tell, the structure of India and China and the scale and the technological capabilities and all of that are very different. So I believe that, or expecting that this relation between China and India and China and India, Russia and India and Russia and China are very different. So this is a doubt that I have. How different are these relations between Russia and China and Russia and India? And also, this revival of industrialization in Russia, they have like some role of companies from China, for example, internationalization of China into the Russian market, the Russian economy, which would be like a more complicated relation than just export and import, because we are talking about foreign direct investment. That's my 3 or 4 questions. I don't know how many questions, but that's my curiosity about that.
Thank you. Yes. Well, you have something in common between two largest nations in the world. They both need energy. That's what Russia can happily produce both to China and to India. And that's what we do. Look, since the fall of the Soviet Union, the oil and gas exporting sectors was the sectors priming Russian economy, because they generated surpluses, they generated incomes on which financial system rested, and therefore on which many other elements of modern economic system rested in Russia. The point is, if you cut the exportation, the preliminary idea of sanctioning Russia was to cut it. Well, it was the idea that Russia is a gas line on the backward side of the road of the world economy and all that. So the idea, let's cut the pipelines, let's cut the exportation. What would happen then? Well, nothing tragic in terms of domestic consumption, because if you have still energy, you can survive. But it would tremendously hit the financial system, of course, and it would hit many services, especially in big cities. Now, reorientation of exports to China and to India, among other parts of the world, allowed that system, let's say, post-industrial sectors of Russian economy to exist, actually. As for importation, well, the problem with, the nature of these profits, which I was telling you about between Russia and India, based upon the fact that India has nothing to export to Russia. Well, there are some importation. There are some imports of pharmaceuticals, tourism, but in terms of general volume of trade, they are negligible. The situation with China is different, of course. And this is again goes to a question, because this is not only the importation of many important elements to be used in industrial production here in Russia, many important information services and so on and so forth. Look, the sanctions virtually, as I told you, it hit the wave of sanctions. The waves of sanctions hit Russian automobile industry, which was assembly industry. Moreover, Western companies abruptly left Russian market. Even if they did not left, they cut off the services. For example, many people who owned BMW here in Russia, Volvo, Mercedes, whatever, specifically the premium brands of cars, they realized all of a sudden that they cannot use their car using they cannot make the engine to start as they used to do. I mean, even the navigation system it assists to operate. What happened? In a matter of 1 year, Chinese cars occupied like 60 to 70% of car sales. Moreover, in addition to that, when Western companies started to close their assembly plants here, the plants which were assembled, Toyotas, BMWs, and so on, Fords, and so on and so forth. Russian government took over these plants and handed it to Chinese companies. So now, this is not only the importation, for example, of Chinese cars, and again, you visibly hear on the streets about two sorts of cars here, especially taxis here in Moscow. They are Chinese. I myself, we own Chinese car. But this is also the opening of assembly plants here. And this is, of course, this cannot be compared with impact of India. But still, India is important market outlet for Russian oil and gas and other resources. Perhaps in the future, due to political relations, some more sophisticated forms of communication, of international communications between Russia and India would emerge, cooperation maybe. But so far, yes, it is more only exportation and the accumulation of trade profits to be solved, to be settled by political means. As for China, despite Chinese companies face the tremendous pressure from the US, from the West in general, despite the fact that Chinese banks face the pressure from the same source, the relations with China are very important for both for China and for Russia, I would say. So I believe that in the next years, these relations would only intensify. Given the fact that we already have the Chinese companies producing here, assembling here, working here.
Thank you very much.
Actually, I have the possibility now to open, which I never did, by the way, but I have, not only I, but we all have the possibility to open bank deposits in yuan. Yuan, I think this is the English word for Chinese currency. We open for international transactions. Russian people can open Union Pay cards, which is the Chinese payment system. Which is not to say that China, of course, is the only the fact which I didn't tell, I mean, I think that 10% of foreigners living, or 10 to 20% of foreigners living now in Dubai, United Arab Emirates, are Russians. So United Arab Emirates became, as well as other countries in the Persian Gulf, they became kind of hubs for transportation, for financial services, for export-import operations. That was also the part of this reorientation towards East, let's put it this way. So that was not only the increase in trade with China and India, it was more diversified situation.
Excellent. I know
but
that
again, sorry, the problem is that while we have these strong relations, we do not have, let's say, financial foundations for that. The payments, the system of payments, while we have the trade relations, the system of payments, the stable, normal system of payments is not there still. It is still has to be solved by case-to-case basis, both in regard to relations with India, with China, elsewhere. That's why I was saying about the impossibility to build industrialization upon in this context without building certain international new international financial system. Given all my pessimism regarding the possibilities to do that.
you are already doing it, no? I'm wondering, what are you really going to do with this accumulation of rupees that you have now?
My dear
interesting question for the. You can.
Luckily, this is not my problem. Luckily, this is not my problem. Luckily, this is not my problem. This is the problem of big businesses, and I have certain optimism about the possibilities for big business to solve their issues. But that issue is not.
You don't know how, but they will solve it. Yeah.
I think so. I think so.
Excellent. So I know that we have lots more questions to solve, but for today, I would thank you again very much, Denis, for your presentation. It was really, really very rich, very insightful, and I think we have to think about that. We have our last class in the next week. We will begin thinking about the implications of what we learned today to understand contemporary global capitalism.
And I will be waiting for my cachaça too.
We wait you to come soon to have your double cachaça, né? For today and for the next.
We'll plan a meeting in Kaliningrad.
Okay.
Okay. So we all thank again Professor Denis. So let's give him our applause. Thank you.
I was happy to see you all. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Bye.
So take care, and I hope we see you soon, face to face. All the best. Thank you very much. Muito obrigado.